we're counting on it working the same this year because we need it. So now I'd like to move into introducing the plenary. And I have the pleasure to bring to the stage the person who's going to introduce Starhawk, and that person is Kalita Todd. Kalita is a longtime originator of this conference, someone who put the food program together, and someone who has been a spiritual mentor to our organization and to individuals in our organization, and is always there bringing in the welcoming, the good spirits, and helping to keep us on track in that regard. I had the pleasure of joining the EcoFarm board in 1997, and Kalita Todd became my friend and board buddy who helped to orient me to EcoFarm. So it's with great pleasure that I bring Kalita Todd to the stage to welcome Starhawk.
Thank you, Ken. Ken joined our board when he was young man, and it was so cool. We were like, young blood, yeah. And he has proved to be such a wonderful, wonderful part of our organization, and now, is a leader. It's wonderful to see that. And you can do it too, if you want to join. So I have the pleasure of bringing Starhawk forward, and I want to say it's been many years. I've been hoping this would happen. And that is because Starhawk is such a great mentor for me in that she not only holds this deep spiritual understanding for the earth and really adds ritual to her life and her walk, anything she's doing, but she also has this incredible knowledge of the earth and has gotten into the deep work of permaculture. She teaches workshops. She has apprentices on her farm up in Cazadero. And there's flyers here on the stage for you to pick up afterwards about information about those various projects she's doing. She's going to be teaching in British Columbia, in Western Massachusetts, in Spain. In February 21st through March 5th, she'll be in Belize, teaching a course with Albert Bates. He wrote the book Biochar Solution. And I'm not going to get her name right, Marisha Auerbach and Christopher Nesbitt. And Christopher works with the Mountain Mayan Farm. And so it's going to be, that sounds really yummy, go to Belize and work on permaculture. She's also just produced this incredible film called The Growing Edge, about permaculture. We watched it last night in chapel. I highly recommend it, and it's only $10. Okay, anything else? Oh, she's written 12 books, and the most well-known of her books is The Fifth Sacred Thing, and she's in the middle of producing a film on this, and so I'm really excited that will come out as a film. It is a prophetic visionary of the possibility of how our economy and social structure might crumble and then be creatively reassembled. So I really recommend that too if you haven't ever read The Fifth Sacred Thing. So here's a woman who walks her talk and who not only holds space in the sacred and the agriculture, she's also an incredible activist. Where I first met her was out in the desert of Nevada. We were protesting the nuclear test site out there. And I learned something from somebody who was working with her, not directly, but we were out doing some protests in San Francisco, and the woman had brought, it was a very hot day, and she had brought this spray bottle, and in a hot day, everybody loves to get sprayed with a little water. Well, the woman had put a little lavender into the water just to uplift the spirits and calm people down. And that's some of the kind of sacred work she does. It's very basic sometimes and just very good sense, It's not all woo-woo, it's just good sense. And so I really appreciate Starhawk's way of thinking on that. So I welcome to the stage Starhawk.
Thank you, Kalita. So, good morning. Here we are at the end of the conference, and I hope you've all enjoyed it and gotten as much inspiration out of it as I have, because I have really had a good time being here. I'm very grateful to the conference organizers for inviting me. Let's see if this works. Nothing's happening. There, wait. There we go. So today, when I suggested various talks to the committee, they liked the one about walking the edge. And as I thought about it, I thought it was really the perfect talk for this place and this group. Because in permaculture and in ecology, there is this concept of the edge, that the edge is a place where two different systems meet, where water meets the earth, where a riparian zone, where a river system meets the woods, a system where the cool air coming in off the ocean meets the mountains, place where the meadow meets the woods. Any of these places where different systems meet, they create a third system, a sort of a special zone that often is more diverse. If you want to know where the deer are going to live, they're not going to live deep in the middle of the redwood forest, and they don't like living way out on a plain with no cover. They like living in places where they can go into the woods to shelter and come out into the meadows to graze. So edges are the borders between things, between cultivated fields that carry a little bit extra of the wild, the borders along roads and pathways. And there are also a lot of edges in our own lives, a lot of edges and places in culture when we encounter something new, when a group of inner city kids encounters a large, scary country animal. Yeah. And I think when we encounter those edges for ourselves, again, those edges can be places of more diversity, more creativity, more life, more dynamism, but they can also be places where when we encounter them, when we come up against them, our immediate reaction can be, uh-oh, fear, this is something unknown. Edges can be places where different cultures meet and sometimes clash. And edges here at Asilomar, of course the edges are, the classic example is where the ocean meets the shore, and where the tides and the rise and the fall of the ocean create all these different niches for life. And I have to say, this is a special place for me. I actually was at Asilomar when I must have been about 11 or 12, because my mother came here for a social work conference. This was probably about 1961 or something like that, when it was newly, part of the state system. And it's the first place in my life I ever saw tide pools. And it was just amazing. I was not one of these wonderful speakers who talked about their great upbringing on the farm and in nature. My upbringing was in the suburbs in LA, and we had one tree my friend Barry and I liked to climb, and every time we did, the woman would come out and yell at us to get out of it, so our parents wouldn't sue her. I loved nature. I always longed for it, but I didn't get a lot of it. And so the first time I really knew there even were such a thing as tide pools was when we came here, and I just remember staring at them, absolutely fascinated. And I would like to say that that led to my future success and career as a marine biologist, but it actually didn't. But it did lead to a lifelong love of staring into things, fascinated, and watching them. So thinking about it, I think we have to acknowledge that farmers, especially ecological farmers, are kind of an edge species. We often live between things. On the edge of the tame and the cultivated, where nature and culture meet, where the human and the animal and the non-human world and the world of critters come together. That edge between tradition and wild innovation. Different technological edges that we encounter in farming, and of course that edge most of us live on. So edges can be scary places. They can be places of conflict. But I think when we encounter an edge, again, even though our first reaction might often be to turn away in fear, edges are also the places where we grow. They say that when you are learning something, the place where you're learning is if you attempt to take on a new skill. If you're trying to learn the violin and you take on a piece that's way, way, way too hard for you, you aren't going to learn from it. You're just going to give up. At the same time, if you constantly play over and over again the pieces you already know and you're comfortable with, you'll stay at the same level. But where you grow is where you take on something that's just a little bit beyond your current comfort level, a little bit beyond your current level of skill, and work and practice that, and that's where you start to grow and where your edge expands. So when we do encounter those uncomfortable edges, we always have the option to move forward and embrace them and to open to them and accept them rather than just turn away in fear. And I'd just like to know if there's anyone here who coming to this conference might be an edge for a lot of people. If you've never done organic farming or you've never done much farming, or anyone come here all alone without knowing anybody? Woo! Let us honor the courage of those people. Yep. That is a big edge, and I hope you have left now knowing lots of new wonderful people and wonderful friends. To get through those edges, there's a principle also we use in permaculture, the idea that diversity really means resilience, and that we should value it and we should honor it instead of fearing it, instead of thinking that something that's diverse or different is a threat. We learn to understand, a prairie that has 400 different species growing in a square meter is going to be much more resilient than a field of genetically engineered corn where everything between it has been rounded up to death, right? And that diversity is, we know, I think as farmers, as ecological farmers, we try to build that diversity into our plant systems, but we can also honor that diversity in our human systems. And for me, one of my current edges that I love to be on is something we're calling social permaculture. The idea that some of the principles we use in creating living systems of beneficial relations, which to me is what permaculture is about and what ecological farming is about. The way that we do that for plants, we can also apply some of those principles to relationships with people, valuing our relationships, finding what are the principles that can help us to work better together, to create healthy groups, to create functional organizations. And we need this because we're on this edge. I don't think I have to tell this crowd that we are on the edge of global ecological meltdown and destruction, and we desperately need the tools and the shifts that can bring us back. This is New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and the BP oil spill. And there is a Native American proverb that says, if we don't change our direction, we're going to wind up where we're headed. And this is where we're headed. And I don't think any of us want to go there. So I always think of Bill Mollison, the founder of permaculture. This is I find one of his favorite sayings, evil is stupidity rigorously applied. Case in point, right? Fukushima, the tar sands, all of these things that we are doing, why are we doing them? How do we stop doing them? Why does anybody think that this is like a reasonable thing that rational adults might actually do to the land? And you know, how do we link together the drought in California with the shooting of so many young men and women of color by police and the police brutality and these things? How are they linked? You know, do these things actually have a relationship? I believe they do. You know, I was pondering it one day. The answer came to me. It was stunningly simple. It was centralized power, like the oil companies, need centralized power. And you know, will reinforce it. And we have seen this tremendous centralization of power, of control, of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. So it's kind of like if you were to graph it, you know, if you graph income inequality, it's like a champagne glass, you know, with the stem and no base, and it's teetering and tottering. And in order to keep people from rising up and refusing, like people are doing, like farmers in Nebraska have come together and said, no, we do not want the Keystone Pipeline to come through our land, because we don't want our land that's been in our family farms for generations and generations to end up looking like this, you know, which is a pipeline spill. And, you know, I have my own personal set of permaculture principles. I teach with a wonderful guy named Charles Williams, and we've come up with our own that starts with, of course, the classic, it depends, because that's what you tend to say more than anything else. But we have another saying that goes, culverts block up. Right? So when we should just know this about culverts. And when you're designing a system, we try not to put culverts in if we can avoid it, because culverts block up. Last year out in Cazadero, where I live, when we finally got one big rain in February, a culvert blocked up on the road and washed out the entire Fort Ross Road and was gone for like 2 months. So culverts block up, pipelines spill. Right. Yeah. Right. People make mistakes. When we're building things like nuclear power plants, they build them as if they weren't run by people and they were run by something that never made mistakes. And people make mistakes. Computers have glitches, right? You know, those of us who farm ecologically or design with permaculture, we design for catastrophe. We know that. So knowing that, you know, the police power that tries to maintain the system is there to stop the uprising, to stop the glass from teetering and tottering, and actually that's not going to work. You know, we know the system is unsustainable. We know that it can't last, and what we need to do is counter it, I believe, by saying, what world do we actually want? I'll take a vote. The world on the left, anyone want that? Yeah. The world on the right? Okay. Do we want a world where billions of children grow up in poverty and dire want? Or do we want a world where kids grow up in gardens and learn to nurture and have wonderful food and get to interact with the soil and explore the bugs and know where they come from? I think we know the answer to that, and as ecological farmers, as land managers, as eaters, as ranchers, we have some great tools for bringing that world about. We have the tools to create regenerative abundance, and I think that is what I would like to see be our watchword. You know, I know often when people talk to environmentalists, you sort of get this scenario that's like, well, we can't keep on living the way we have been living, so we're all going to have to eat gruel and wear nothing but gray homespun and stand in long bread lines, and that's the way it's going to be, right? And that's not a very effective story for mobilizing people, right? It's like we're often saying, the world is worse than you thought, and it's probably your fault, right? And then we wonder why people aren't flocking to join our movements, you know, right? But instead, I think what we can be telling people is the world could be better than we have imagined, and we have the tools to bring it about, and it will actually be a world that is better for the earth, that is more abundant, that gives us more to enjoy and more to share. And yeah. You know, and the tools of permaculture, you know, the simple things that we can create, the tools that you all have as ecological farmers, as food growers, are the tools that we need to bring that world about. We know how to create that wonderful regenerative abundance. So the permaculture ethics, I think, are a great guide. Care for the earth, care for people, and that third one that everyone says a little differently, I like care for the future, but you can also say share the surplus, reduce consumption. All those things involve creating a future for our children. And you know, I came to permaculture and agriculture actually out of years of doing earth-based spirituality and ritual and goddess stuff, and I found that permaculture and agroecology and all that was like the how-to part of believing that the earth is sacred, and that the ethics were really identical. It's about, I think core to that is understanding that you really can't care for the earth unless you care for the people, and that you can't really care for the people unless you care for the land base, for the earth, for the ecological systems that support life. So here we are at the edge. What are some of the niches on this edge? You know, we are at the edge where we really get to choose whether we have a dismal world of eking out some sort of sub-existence for our future children if they can live at all, or a wonderful world of shared abundance for everybody. For me, that's a no-brainer, but you know, you may think differently. I don't know. I doubt it. Right? But if we think about this as an edge of transformation, an edge of great cultural shift, what are some of the niches on that need to be filled? There's a niche of protest. You know, we need to stand up against the utter stupidities that are being foisted on us and say no. And I'm so grateful for people like Bill McKibben and all those people who do stand up, who are at the climate march, who've been putting this out in the public eye, because we need to build a strong and united movement to actually say to the powers that be, no, actually, we are not going to go down that road. This was our little affinity group in the hills doing our 350 for 350.org. Right? That can be a harsh edge. It's not easy to be on the edge of protest. It's not easy to stand up against that power. But I think part of the value of doing that is that the more we stand up against that immense power, the more we keep open that political space. And the more we can support and stand up with the people who are doing that, the ranchers in Nebraska, the people in Texas, the indigenous people who've been at the forefront of the struggle against the pipeline and who are at the forefront of so many struggles to preserve land, then the more that we have of a base to continue on, the more that we can prevent the destruction. But we also need people who follow those other niches, the policymakers. I've been really inspired hearing some of the work people have been doing here around working with the government, getting into local government, getting grants and getting money and getting resources for doing the regenerative work that we're doing. In permaculture, we also have a principle, we say, least change for the greatest effect. What can you do? What's the smallest thing you can do to bring about the impact that you want? And sometimes the smallest thing you can do, it's a lot easier to get your local government to approve legal gray water than it is to make a revolution and overturn capitalism. Right? Right. It might, that might be the long-term goal. But in the meantime, it's a good thing if while we're doing that, we can be reusing our gray water, right? Like last night, someone talked about just getting permitted farmers markets that are certified. That might not seem like, the millennium has come, but it makes a huge, huge difference to people being able to make a livelihood. And people are able to make a livelihood, they are able to do more of this work and more of this regenerative work. So working in that way, in advocacy in all of its different ways. Someone talked about running for local offices. There's lots of things like the water boards, that often aren't like heavily contested elections. People don't pay a lot of attention to it, but you get on that board and suddenly you are a voice to control development. You are a voice in some really key issues about who's going to get water and how it's going to be allocated. Working with people, I also do fair amount of work with people in the inner cities in San Francisco. Lots of those programs, they need funding, they need support. We need to be willing to work with those things, and I don't think we should get involved in these really fruitless conversations about what's the best form of struggle, right? Again, if we look at change as an edge that has lots of ecological niches, we need to fill all of those niches, not be telling somebody you're on the wrong niche. So we need science and technology, and we need mad inventors coming up with new forms of wind power and solar power, and we have immense resources in all of those directions. All kinds of amazing innovative things like this parabolic solar cooker that directs the heat inside so you can cook in the comfort of your counter rather than having to go out to your little solar cooker in the back field. We need visionary scientists, and we need artists and dreamers. We need to imagine what life could be and inspire and come up with just wild and amazing visions of how we could transform our cities and our countryside. Some of these drawings are by Mark Lakeman, who's a wonderful visionary artist in Portland. And this is something Jessica Pearlstein did for the Fifth Sacred Thing, for the project we have of turning my book into some form of movie or TV show. So this is Envisioning San Francisco Transformed. Yeah. But I actually think as farmers and ranchers and land people, the truth is like we are all of those things. Any of you who farm know that you have to be a little bit scientist, a little bit mechanic, right? A lot visionary and dreamer, because honestly, if you were a sensible, practical person, you would be managing a hedge fund instead of a hedge, right? Even though there's really nothing in a hedge fund you can eat, and it's not really providing any good ecological services, right? We need, you need to be all kinds of things, including an accountant and a business person and a lover and a tender of nurturer of plants and priest and spiritual person. In fact, you need to be kind of a magician. And the magician card in the tarot, let's see if the pointer works. It's got symbols for earth and water and air and fire. And the idea is the magician stands between heaven and earth and is the master of all the elements, like farmers. So the air and the fire and the water and the earth are sort of our alchemical materials that we mix together. And in another sense, you'd say that we also have to be high priestesses of the sacred mysteries of this, of dirt. Mm-hmm. And the wonderful thing about dirt, I love dirt, I love soil biology. And when you start delving into the wonderful mysteries of the life in the soil, you realize that that little handful of soil might have hundreds of millions, billions of living bacteria and miles of fungal hyphae and hundreds of thousands of protozoa and nematodes and worm castings and all kinds of things all working together. It is, in fact, a world and a life that's right there under our feet. And that all of those things are our allies. They are the smallest, literally most humble things, but they are the allies that we need in order to maintain fertility. So when we think of spirit, this, we tend to think of something like this. We are living in a culture where our metaphoric structures are all about spirit and value being high and light and up. We talk about our higher power, we talk about being light workers and all that. Whereas as farmers and gardeners, we tend to see spirit as this. Maybe that's a little bit of a harder sell for some people, I don't know. For me, there's nothing makes me happier than my worms. Like, oh, they're so pink and shiny. Or we might see it as this, the fungal mycelium that live under the earth and that knit the whole things together and have such immense powers to break down toxins and also create soil fertility that link plant to plant and help trees in the forest actually share nutrients through these fungal networks. And of course this, the chloroplasts, the cells that contain that miraculous alchemical thing that makes the green plants green and that makes all of life on earth function. Chlorophyll. What a beautiful sacred icon. And if you look at that molecule that performs this alchemical miracle of transforming light into sugar, into food and energy, it's like a beautiful mandala. It's like a chalice, held up to receive sunlight and transform it. So I feel like I'm finally here. I was here once years and years ago, but I'm here kind of like not under false pretenses. I can actually call myself a rancher. Yeah. And we have a ranch, and we're trying to put some of this alchemy, some of this magic into practice with a permaculture design that will allow us to sequester carbon and become a model of integrating all the different systems that we have for taking that carbon out of the atmosphere, sequestering it into the soil. And I hope that if you've been here through this weekend, you've heard many, many people speak about that in depth. We're in the Cazadero Hills out in western Sonoma County. It's incredibly beautiful, but when you look at those hills, nobody would look at them and say, oh, that's a perfect place for a farm. It's very steep, very rugged. But we do have sheep there, and we're doing holistic management grazing with a herd of Katahdin sheep and a few goats. And we mix it with some traditional shepherding. We actually walk them around the hill so they can get more forage. Charles Williams, he's the one with the beard, not the one with the ears. He is the farm manager and permaculture designer, and he also co-teaches many of the courses that I work with, and he's really brilliant at implementing these systems. So even during the drought last year, we didn't have to import feed. We graze our land, but we also graze our neighbors' lands who are really thrilled to have us do it because we're keeping down, even if they don't get the holistic management stuff and the soil stuff and whatever, they really get the fuel reduction stuff and the reduction of the fire danger and the fact that instead of them having to go out with a noisy gas-guzzling machine to do their mowing, the sheep will do it for them. So they also give you like an excuse for lots of cute pictures of sheep. But we're integrating it also with food forests and perennial systems, with olives and different Mediterranean herbs and plants. And a lot of teaching. We do permaculture courses there. As Kalita said, we have a lot of courses in Western Sonoma County and a lot of other places. We have internships that come through. We have a Way of the Shepherd internship where you can walk with the sheep and learn the traditional shepherding and animal care, and also have time to devote to your own spiritual practice or your own creative practice. And we do a lot of work to try to build diversity, a lot of fundraising to make sure that we have diversity in our courses, because we feel like this knowledge needs to get out to people who are leaders in the communities that are most impacted. And that's not all the white community, it is the communities, people who actually do the bulk of the farm work in this country and actually are most impacted in our cities by lack of food, by food deserts, by ill health. So we have some ongoing partnerships with groups in Hunters Point in San Francisco, in the inner city there, and in other places, the Black Permaculture Network and Earth Activist Training, which is our organization. And it's really wonderful when we get to bring some of the girls from the city out, or when we bring our permaculture courses out. Just getting people in touch with nature, in touch with the animals. I mean, I've had kids in the city say, like, we ain't gonna eat the shit we grew in the garden, are we? It grew in the dirt, you know. And when they get exposed, when they have a chance to grow stuff and grow food and learn that and come out, it makes them more interested in eating the food, which is better for their health. It gives them access to that food. And it also, I think, is really important just to orient people to the world and how we live in it and who we are and how food really grows. To me, that's just a basic thing that all children should get. You know, it should, you know, we spend, I don't know how much time in our schools teaching kids things like calculus and algebra when we haven't bothered to teach them where their food comes from. And, you know. So we have a lot of interns, and I'm just waiting to see who's going to respond to this slide, right? It's not always easy to teach people the fine distinctions out on the land about what is straw, what is hay, why you feed one and not the other. But it takes a lot of patience, but it also is a real gift. And we do natural building. We grow herbs for distilling. I wish I could say that we've woven this all into a wonderful system that has sent our, you know, kids through college and whatever, but at this point, we're still trying to figure out how to actually make it work financially, but we're only about 2 or 3 years into it, and I hope at some point to come back here as one of these success stories and be able to say, like, you know, this is actually really financially working as well. Yeah, it's definitely a success on so many levels, other levels that I know that will come to. So I just wanted to tell the personal story because I think we have these tools, and I want to go through what some of them are. When we talk about working around climate change, I think the biggest obstacle to getting people involved is hopelessness and despair. Once people acknowledge the state we're in, they go to, I think Al Gore said, people go immediately from denial to despair without stopping to do anything constructive along the way. And I think what we've heard in this conference is we have the tools to counter despair because we have the tools to take some of that excess carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it. And they involve many of the practices that are the best practices for the land. Rehydrating the land, storing water, doing all of those traditional things like swales and terraces and all those terraforming techniques that can slow it, spread it, sink it, hold that water on the land. The keyline system that allows you to sort of go over the land and put deep grooves in it that can capture the water when it falls and get it deeper into the subsoil and build soil farther below. There are water landscapes. This is a place in Portugal where the permaculture designer Sepp Holzer designed this water landscape in a dry valley that's capturing hundreds of thousands of gallons of rainwater and holding it and infiltrating it and rehydrating the whole valley. We need to preserve what is left that's still pristine, if we can find it. The rainforest, the old growth. Those are great, powerful carbon sinks, and they are so important and so soul feeding on so many different levels. There's a rainforest in Tasmania where Bill Mollison and David Holmgren kind of invented permaculture. We need to partner with fungi. Paul Stamets, who's sort of the fungal wizard of the world, has taught us how important they can be in bioremediation. These are fungi that are capturing rainwater. They're capturing runoff from a vineyard that uses a lot of pesticides and herbicides and helping to break it down before it goes further onto the neighboring land. We can plant perennial systems. We can do food forests and polycultures and trees to help sequester carbon and provide resilient, long-term, stable sources of food. And we can sequester carbon in so many different ways in soil. Compost and sheet mulching, which is kind of horizontal composting. We can make compost tea, which will help brew up like a source of those beneficial microorganisms that you can infuse into your fields and your plants and your trees. We can make biochar. We can sequester the carbon by burning wood or other material in low oxygen environment that captures about 80% of the carbon that's in it, and it can be used as a soil amendment, as kind of a hotel for beneficial microorganisms. It's tremendously powerful in building living soil. There are many bioremediation methods that can help us to clean toxins, compost and worms, compost tea, anything that gets the soil full of biological life can help break down some of the toxins and heal some of the damage. And the holistic management grazing, and I talked about grazing in ways that mimic the way big herds move across the land in natural systems. So you use electric fencing, you have them in smaller paddocks, they graze it down hard and they move on. And what that does is it allows the grass to recover. It sheds roots, and those roots decay underground and they build soil underground. So that to me is a very hopeful way that we can be building soil on a mass scale. The grasslands are one of the largest ecosystems on the planet, and the advantage of doing it in grass is that the biomass, the carbon, the living part of it is held in the roots and held under the soil. So with a forest, you've got amazing biomass in the trees, but if the trees burn or they get cut down, it all goes away. But in the grasslands, they're designed to be eaten by nature. And the soil becomes the store, and that store is very stable. The other aspect of it is what so many people here are working on, localizing the farmers markets, the food systems, building those local food systems. Cuba did this when the Soviet Union collapsed, and they no longer had imports of oil or exports for their sugar cane, and they had to shift to actually producing agriculture in and around the cities that actually fed their people. And the first year after that collapse, people lost, they said the average person lost like 35 pounds. They lost a third of their body weight. There was huge want. But after a few years, people were actually healthier. They were growing organically because they didn't have a choice. And we were able to visit Cuba with the International Permaculture Convergence last year. It was tremendously inspiring. And people here are doing so many things. How many here are working with farmers markets or direct sales to customers or restaurants or some way involved in building local food systems and food sheds and resiliency? I think that's a tremendously important niche for building resiliency and building true national security and food security. Community gardens in the cities can be places where people get fed, where people get exposed to gardening, where people can grow food, even if they might not always like what they grow. Like I said, and the edges aren't always comfortable. So I would say if there's one counter to climate change, it would be community. And there's so many ways we can build community. Just some shots from City Repair in Portland, because I think they've done some of the most innovative stuff. They take intersections and turn them into gathering places. And they've got here a tea station where someone can get tea any time of the day or night. They've got a little information station over there. They've got a tea horse, which goes around the city and can spread those wings and provide an instant gathering place. They do a village building convergence where people come and do natural building anytime, like in the spring, and do amazing projects that bridge public and private space in some very creative ways. So I think when we can use art and imagination to inspire people, then again, we're telling people a story that I think is going to move people, that is going to say, hey, if we get together, we can have a life that is good, that is based on something other than just amassing more and more stuff, but instead amassing more and more relationships and time and enjoyment and magic. So imagination is an unlimited resource. And I think as farmers, as ranchers, as ecological activists, one of the things we can really do is feed the imagination and grow the imagination. And we can do that. I think it's important for you all when you go home to be telling the stories, to be thinking about what is your edge of comfort, of familiarity. Maybe your edge is, I like to grow vegetables, but I'm shy when it comes to talking to people. Right? Or maybe your edge is, I got my thing together, but I can't deal with my neighbors. You know? Or maybe your edge is, I've got my kids' school organized, but I don't know if I want to take on organizing the whole school district around that. And just encourage you to push that edge, to step into something that might be a little out of your comfort zone. Because I feel like we are at a point where we need to be more than an edge species. We need to become the ecosystem. We need to become the norm, and we need to do that quickly. So we need everybody's voice to inspire, just talking to people and telling your stories, telling what you experienced here, telling what you've done on your farm, showing people what is possible, making sure people understand that it is possible and that we can do this if we do this together is itself a tremendous and powerful political force. Awakening that sense of wonder and really cherishing the sacred in all. That, I think, is what we're about as ecological farmers, and that is what we can be about as a society, as a world, as a nation, and what we need to be about if we're going to make this transition and we're going to survive. Thank you.